Good afternoon. I am Liz Powell. I am the founder of G2G Consulting. And today we wanted to talk about MHSRS and DoD funding opportunities and ways to advance your bioscience or life sciences company. We've got an awesome panel today. Super excited to have my colleagues join me. So we will just move through the slides and move across the different speakers. If you have questions, please post them in the chat box. Also, we are recording and we will distribute the recording after today's event. Next slide, please. So the next slide is what we're going to cover today. So we're going to start with just a little bit of background on G2G and our work in accessing Department of Defense funding. We are then going to give you information on government funding sources, some key targets for you to be looking out for. We want to explain our Gbg report, which is the Government Biosciences Grants Report we produce every month, and how best to do grant tracking. And then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty about military health funding, how the system is set up, how you can position to build collaborations, relationships, and access funding. We're going to get into details about the conference, answer your questions on that. And the highlight, I think, of today is hearing from a true expert, an amazing entrepreneur, leader in health innovation, Prakash Goel. He is going to share his expertise, his experiences of presenting at MHSRS and working with the Department of Defense. So I think that's going to be really valuable for folks. And then we're going to close out with some questions and discussion, final tips. So as I said, please think about questions that you have. You can post them while we're talking, or you can save them till the end, but we definitely wanted this to be interactive and be able to answer any questions that you have. Next slide, please. So this just gives a quick background on G2G. So I started G2G 15 years ago. We're actually celebrating our 15th anniversary this year. I had previously worked on Capitol Hill. I had worked for a couple different members, but one in particular I staffed the Armed Services Committee for and learned a lot of the different pathways for funding and policy in that work. I'm also an attorney and have a master's in public health. I started G2G, which is government to growth, because I met a lot of entrepreneurs, many in the health area doing great things, but not knowing how to access funding or navigate government. And so since then, we have built up an amazing team. I'm joined by some of my colleagues today, you can see on the screen, and many more. We are based in a few different locations, Washington, D.C., Cleveland, and Columbus, but we work across the country and have raised over $413 million since I started the firm. So super excited about that figure. It actually is going to be higher in just a few more months. We've done a ton of policy work, regulatory work as well, really developed relationships and helped advance and accelerate the growth of life sciences companies, life science organizations by collaborating with government. So that gives you a quick overview of us. We do this Gbg report, as I mentioned at the top of the presentation. My colleague Greg is going to get into more detail on that, but it's a great resource. Not only do we do the report, but we do a monthly webinar where we actually go over highlights of the report. So in case you're too busy to read it, which I completely understand, we help you get through it in a very efficient way. I've talked about our different locations. We have a lot of different satellite operations as well. We've been very active in Western Pennsylvania for several years, in addition to Ohio and the Midwest. And we work with a lot of different bio chapters over the years. We've worked with different state bio chapters, love that collaboration. Those advocacy organizations are great. I highly recommend joining if you have not yet. And then we've got a nice focus on women in health, women in defense, and then just overall advancing healthcare. So that's just a quick rundown of us and me, but would love to move on to the next slide. So this is a chart to show you where the government funding sources are. as you can see, the big blue slice of the pie, the largest one by far is defense. They have the most funding. And so whenever we start to work with bioscience companies, we always ask what they're doing and try and see if there's a path towards working with DoD, because it's such a huge source of funding. In fact, the largest breast cancer research funding actually happens out of DoD. So some people already know this, some people don't. So I just want to make sure I'm clear that is why we have a big focus on defense. We obviously have worked in many other areas. There's lots of different pockets of funding spanning from DoD to BARDA to NIH to NSF, even DOE. There's lots of different sources across government, but it's just Department of Defense has the most. And so some of those numbers sort of show the comparison over the years, year-to-year funding. We're actually they just finished FY22 in March, and they're just starting now marking up FY23, at least in the House. So those numbers will be updated by the time we next do our presentation, which we are going to be doing in August. So we will update that for you in the future. The final takeaway for this slide are the categories of funding, because I get this question all the time. Someone will tell me some story of some company they read in the news. Well, really, there's only 4 ways to get funding. One is through legislation, primarily through the Defense Appropriations Bill or any of the 12 appropriations bills, or an authorization. And again, DoD, they have their own authorization bill once a year called the National Defense Authorization Act. So for defense, it's either Defense Appropes or the National Defense Authorization Act. There are other appropriation bills where you can tee up funding opportunities as well, but today we're really talking about defense. Grants is the next category. That's where they come out with an RFP, you respond to it. A big one within there is Cdmrp, which I think some people are familiar with, Congressionally Directed Military Research Program. That's just one of many examples. The third category, discretionary funding. There are opportunities to collaborate with the government to access this discretionary pot of money. A lot of that depends on interacting with the correct program managers and offering something that they're truly looking for. You have to really be a match for that. And then finally, the fourth is procurement. And the ideal pathway for most life sciences companies is to get in on the early research side, work together to help advance that research, and then get funded as a contract. So I think that wraps up that slide. Next slide, please. So government funding systems, I think it's important just to also explain not just the different categories, but where they come from. So every year, the White House comes out with their budget proposal, and they're actually starting to work on it now this summer. And they will then unveil it at the top of next year in February. The president then sends over his budget proposal to Congress, which then they respond to. They come up with their top line funding levels, and then they produce their 12 independent appropriation bills, which by the end of the process get smashed together as an omnibus, which keeps happening year after year. But technically, they're supposed to do 12 individual bills. Meanwhile, the departments and agencies, they work with the White House to develop that budget proposal. And so there's a lot of back and forth between the summer and December with the agencies and the White House to get these final numbers, new programs they want to launch. And then the final version gets done in February, ideally. Sometimes if the appropriations process is delayed, or if we have a new president, then it gets delayed further into April, sometimes even May, but hopefully not too much after that. So just to explain the different ways in which the funding moves through the system to then reach a life sciences company, I think is important to understand. And if Congress holds up their omnibus bill or their appropriations bills, that can then hold up the agencies. Or if Congress is forced to do what's called a CR, continuing resolution, then the agencies cannot do any new initiatives. They have to they're level funded, and they continue on as they functioned the previous year. So it's really in everyone's interest to get the new appropriations bills done every year. And they set up those funding lines that we all pursue for the life sciences industry. Next slide, please. So this is a list of the key targets. We could do a whole nother presentation on this, but we just wanted to quickly touch on it. so that you're familiar that there are many opportunities out there for life sciences. You're welcome to talk to us. We can do, side conversations offline or participate in our monthly GBG calls where we go over a lot of this. But the key is to understand that there's so many more opportunities beyond NIH and beyond SBIRs. I know many are familiar with SBIRs. It's a great program. However, you can get larger funding through some of these other sources. So BARDA is the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. It's actually under HHS, but it is a great organization for funding mass casualty response technologies and innovations. They address a lot of sort of first responder concerns, and they do contracts. So they're a little bit further down in the development continuum, but they've got all kinds of different programs now. It's really expanded since it was launched, and it was sort of launched as a post response to 9/11 and the anthrax that happened on Capitol Hill. And so it's really grown over the years and has become a really good resource for a lot of life science companies. Obviously, they became very central during the whole COVID pandemic response. NSF, National Science Foundation, I think folks are familiar with that. Also SBIRs, a couple of these other opportunities as well. And they're doing some unique things if you're partnering with economic development organizations. The NSF Engines program, for example, was just launched this year. So there can be some good opportunities there as well. DOE's Department of Energy, they actually have the supercomputers. And so a lot of the data crunching, analysis, partnerships have happened with pharmaceutical companies over the years. So there are some good opportunities there for companies to know about. Department of Defense, that's what we're going to talk about today. As I said, there's SBIR's program announcements, BAAs or broad agency announcements, DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Program. DARPA is all about revolutionary change, robots running the world. And what's really exciting is ARPA-H is now a new opportunity. They have not come out with any RFPs for ARPA-H, so we're still sort of watching it. I actually was just meeting, we were at OSTP last week about the Rph plans. And last night, the House passed their version of the Rph bill that gives the necessary authorities to really get this going. So right now, Rph has a deputy director, Dr. Adam Russell, but they don't have an actual director yet. And they wanted to see what Congress does before they do that. But technically, they have funds. They're starting to get things going. So we are tracking for how they unfold the application process. And we will definitely update you on that. I'm sure we'll have updates at our next MHSRS webinar. And we definitely want to share that with you. And I think by the fall, we'll have a lot of clarity of how it all functions. VA. The VA is another funding source. However, it has probably the least amount of funding. And it's really better for pilot projects. So much further along in that development continuum. And they also require the PI to be within the VA system. So some nuances there to think about. Key conferences, the MHSRS we're going to talk about today. SOMSA's another one. They're focused. It's a nice crossover actually with BARDA. It's a lot of first responder focus to it. There's trauma care conferences, burn care conferences. There's one that's a top of every year, American Cancer. So there's a lot of different conferences where government officials are going, program managers are going, and really good ways to network. So really encourage you to be on the lookout for those. BARDA has their own conference. It's in November every year. And then Tech Connect has started to really grow over the past few years, and they have a defense focused one. Also a lot of good networking there. I would say though, MHSRS is the best of all of these. If you're trying to access DoD contacts, DoD funding, DoD collaborations, trying to figure out what their priorities are, MHSRS is the one to be it. So with that, I would love to pass it over to my colleague, Greg.
Great. Thanks a lot, Liz. It's wonderful to see everybody who's joining today. Braden, we can go to the next slide. While he's doing that, I'll just kind of give my background real quick. My name's Greg Kapkar. I'm a public affairs director with G2G. Been here for over 5 years. And the wonderful thing about G2G is we've got a great bipartisan team with folks that have backgrounds having worked on the Hill or worked within the Biden administration or in state government. what I bring to the table is my career has been entirely on the private sector side. I've worked within organizations in the private sector and working to get into government to access funding. I've got a master's in public administration, and my role here at G2G includes one of many things is the bioscience grants report. I work really closely with Heather Risher on our team, who is just the master when it comes to tracking and searching these things out. And Liz had mentioned a couple of times about our Gbg report, and I just want to make sure that many of you are familiar with that. So we publish this once a month. It's a report that is a compilation of monthly opportunities. And there are actually a couple different things. We actually have a tracking service that we provide for companies that may want to just purchase that service. And as a result of that, we do a webinar the third Friday of every month. The first half hour of that webinar is open and free to anybody to join in. And it's during that we'll actually share that month's report. And what you're seeing here is the cover of the June report. But during that webinar, we walk through it, we take some questions and answers, and the report is really laid out in a user-friendly way where it's providing hyperlinks to titles and actually to the announcement itself. And there's a short description along with deadlines and things like that, just as kind of a one-stop shop where you can see what's out there as opposed to trying to track everything down through different websites. But also as part of that webinar that we do is the second 30 minutes is a private consultation for just G2G clients or those who have purchased the reporting service, where we take a much deeper dive, and it's actually become kind of this ecosystem of companies that are working in many different spaces, and we offer some tips and things on ways to take in direction, take products into different directions, but also it's become a supportive network where people are connecting and collaborating on other projects. So just wanted to flag that for you, and you are welcome to join. Braden, let's go to the next slide. So Liz has talked about government funding sources, and I want to kind of augment some of the things that she said. And we find that a lot of companies that are interested in this type of work are very familiar with NIH and the whole SBIR process. Some of that can be a little tedious and time consuming for very little return. And some of these other opportunities we're talking about today, especially with the DoD, start to kind of break through that noise and can find kind of these ripe opportunities that we're really excited to have Vikash Goel from Centerline Biomedical talk about here in the second half hour. So my task is to power through these slides so that we can get to that. But just wanted to mention a couple things. Grants.gov is probably the most familiar site. If you're new to this space as far as going after funding, that's a place you could start. Definitely want to make sure that you check out sam.gov. It is the one-stop shop for registering your company to be able to apply and receive money from the government. And so if you're new to this space, you want to make sure that there are things like cage codes and DUNS numbers, although recently they've just changed where they're using not DUNS numbers, but unique entity IDs when you sign up for sam.gov. And probably one of the biggest frustrations that we find for newer companies that aren't familiar with kind of the grant spaces, they find an opportunity that they want to apply for, but yet the brakes get slammed when they have a deadline in 2 weeks and they don't have a sam.gov registration, or they don't have a cage code, or so those are all the types of things that you want to have ready to go. The NSF SBIR process, the American Seed Fund, is another source, and you just all of these are listed here. BARDA, Liz has talked about, so I won't spend any more time on that, other than to emphasize that, you know, it's about mass casualty, how to protect the homeland from natural disasters, as well as you know, kind of human attacks, so to speak. So let's see, let's go to the next slide. Yeah, okay. And then on this one, we're diving a little bit deeper kind of into the DoD hole here. The U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command is the logo that you see on the left. And this is a really good R&D entity to get familiar with. And it's entirely related to the DoD's medical research and development and acquisition. And there are some key categories that fall within USAMRDC, like infectious disease or combat casualty care, which is actually the category that Vikash and Centerline will fall under, and that he'll talk about in a little bit. Operational medicine or chemical biological defense, as well as blast injury. This Cdmrp, this congressionally directed medical research program, promotes a ton of medical research funding opportunities that address really critical needs within the military, but interestingly enough, they want a dual purpose. So it not only has to apply for military, but also general public use. And that's important and key. And there are 40 different research categories that fall within Cdmrp. And as we kind of make the connection here, Liz talked about Congress and the appropriations process. All of these projects, all of these categories get funded and determined by Congress. We've been successful in actually helping to shape some of that, and we were successful in getting rare cancers added to the list of Cdmrp research opportunities. There are things in here like alcohol and substance abuse, autism, cancer. I mean, there's just a whole litany of different cancers like breast and kidney and lung and ovarian, and the list goes on. Combat readiness, military burn, TBI, traumatic brain injury. So definitely something to check out if you've not looked at that before. DARPA, Liz mentioned that. I wanted to say just something a little bit more about that. And you know, she talked about robots and things. And so DARPA, if you're not familiar with it, has brought us some modern things in the world like the Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine, the internet, weather satellites. They've also done drones and voice interfaces, and the personal computer comes out of DARPA. And we've done a number of meetings with them. And you know, the thing we hear over and over again is that if your idea is already being done, it's probably not going to be a fit for DARPA. They do not want to build a better mousetrap. They want to make the impossible possible. So if your idea is not being done by somebody else and you're not just trying to tweak things around the edges, DARPA is definitely something to look into. And there are a couple pathways to get in there through broad agency announcements or even just doing some a white paper. MTech is one that I definitely want to lift up, this Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium. They work very closely with USAMRDC and the different directorates from there. And again, looking at military medical needs, the interesting thing about MTech is, one, it is a membership association, so you do have to be a member to be able to apply for their funding, but you do not have to be a member to see what types of things they're looking to fund. They also operate on what are called other transaction authorities or other transaction agreements. And this allows the DoD to carry out certain prototypes and research or just production projects. And it gives the DoD some flexibility that they may not have if they're going through like DoD channels. So if you're interested in MTech, if you're a large business, it's like $5,000 a year to join. If you're a small business, it's about $1,000 or $1,000. And then they do have some multi-member organizations at $500, but that is another source for funding opportunities. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I'm going to try to wrap some things up here very quickly. So I'm going to just say about this slide, the military health system, you know, Liz showed us that wonderful pie chart of how much money is there. But looking at this, it just gives us a sense of the scope and the breadth of the military health system, you know, serving over 9 million beneficiaries at hundreds of locations that include military hospitals, medical clinics, and integrated service networks. Next slide. There's some basics, and I will mention, I know that there were some questions that I answered offline that we will provide these slides afterwards. So once the video is uploaded, we'll send out this slide deck. So don't be worried that you won't be able to access this again, but we will provide this afterwards. So these are just some things to know about Defense Health Agency, which is really the medical services to provide a medical readiness, make sure that the force is ready to go. DHA is the leading as far as they lead in integrating readiness and health. Liz mentioned appropriations, setting funding levels, so I don't really want to go through that too much at this point. Let's go to MHSRS, the next slide. Okay, so this is, what does it stand for? It's the Military Health System Research Symposium. It's DoD's premier military civilian scientific meeting. It includes academia and industry. It's really the largest medical conference of the year. In years past, they've had upwards of 3,500 to 4,000 attendees. I jokingly say that this is kind of like the JP Morgan in the DoD world, that lots of people come to Florida to have this conference and just talk about research and make these connections and things like that. If you have innovations that are relevant to the military around some medical gaps, this is ideal. They've got about 60 breakout sessions. It's over the course of 4 days. And we know that they've accepted like 390 presentations and such. So just yesterday, they released the fact that that the conference is going. Up until this point, it was tentative, but it is on for September 12th through 15th. It's down in Florida at the Gaylord Palms Resort. And then the other thing is we know that registration for the conference will open up on July 11th. But let's go to the next slide. And some of this is what I just said, but this is just a screenshot of what you would find at their website as far as when the conference will be and how to register and things like that. So I really can't stress enough how important it is. This is a great conference to just go and work. And one of the things that we will do is we'll study the agenda ahead of time, figure out, say in Centerline's case, who's working in hemorrhage control and who's presenting, and try to set up meetings in advance of going to MHSRS. And then while we're there, we're going to workshops and meeting with those who are doing presentations, setting up lunch, things like that. So I can't overemphasize the great networking opportunity. So with that, I think I'm a little bit ahead of schedule, and I wanted to reserve and bank as much time as possible for this next session. I'm going to kick it over to Liz to introduce Vikash very quickly, and then we'll go into a kind of like fireside chat, moderated discussion, and really ask for your participation through the chat or Q&A. So Liz, I'm going to kick it over to you to introduce Vikash.
Great, thanks, Greg. So we have known Vikash for a long time now. He is an amazing leader throughout the Northeastern Ohio area and really across the country in advancing health innovation that's really needed for patients. He helped start Centerline Biomedical after working within the Cleveland Clinic system, and has really an inspiring story behind that. And he's gone on to develop really valuable partnerships, collaborations with DoD and others in government, and has religiously come to MHSRS with us over the years, several times now, and has been invited to present because he has such compelling technology. So he's someone who hasn't been just like once, he's been a few times now. And so he really does know how to navigate MHSRS. So he thought it'd be perfect to have Vikash share his experiences, give his insights. He's sort of our live case study for you all. So would love to pass it over to you, Vikash. And again, just keep putting in your questions here. We really appreciate them.
Thank you for that glowing intro, Liz, and thank you to you and all of the G2G team for the opportunity to join this webinar and share my experience. I really feel like it's been, I guess, 4.5 years that we've worked together, and I've learned so much in that time that I would like my brethren in arms to benefit from. So I'm Vikash Goyal, as Liz said, the founder and CTO of Centerline Biomedical. And just a little bit about Centerline. We are a Cleveland startup company, originally spun out of Cleveland Clinic, and our focus is on navigation technologies for minimally invasive surgeries and interventional procedures. And our story, it kind of really shows how working with government can help push innovation forward. I started as a part of a team of researchers at Cleveland Clinic working on technologies to improve endovascular surgery. And so when I say endovascular surgery, I mean, this is when doctors are like fixing arteries or veins from the inside out through small incisions or punctures. so stents and wires and catheters and balloons. But the conventional way that they navigate their wires and catheters, these tools that go inside the body, is with X-rays. And X-rays work. They magically let you see inside a human body, which is that enables so much therapy that wasn't possible before. But at the same time, X-ray images can be hard to read. And of course, they use a lot of radiation. And some of these procedures, it's quite shocking when you do the math and realize how much radiation we're talking about. And it's an active intervention. So that radiation is not just hitting the patient, but it's hitting a room full of people who are providing care. And so, from inside the operating room at Cleveland Clinic in the Heart and Vascular Institute, my colleagues and I conceived of a technology we call IOPS, so the intraoperative positioning system. It's essentially a miniature version of 3D, like GPS navigation for these doctors to use. So the idea is we let them see better. They can see in color and in 3D, something more intuitive that helps them understand the anatomy better, but also then navigate through it more safely. So we saw this opportunity. We could improve a bunch of important healthcare targets with our platform. You improve navigation, then you can be more accurate, be more efficient, reduce costs, improve the quality of care. If you improve radiation safety, then you reduce this unwanted damage to body tissues. You reduce the risk of cancer. And cancer, that one's a big deal. If we're talking about surgeons and cardiologists, interventional radiologists that are dying of cancer as a result of the tool they use to heal their patients. And for me personally, this has a deep personal relevance, and to our founding team. The surgeon that founded our lab and that mentored us for many years actually ended up passing away relatively young from cancer. So his name was Roy Greenberg, and he was one of the world's leaders in endovascular surgery, and his loss is felt every day in the field. But we've developed this technology to try to protect our nation's, our world's doctors and healers from radiation while improving care. And so we are actually in the market with our first product right now. But what we see that we have is a platform that can be used for much broader and deeper applications than what we have in our first product. So we worked with government along the way to develop this. Actually, even before the company, we got funding from Ohio Third Frontier to validate some of the early technology. That's also where some of the seed funding for the company came from. We proceeded through additional kind of state funding vehicles. We've received 4 SBIR and STTR grants from NIH. And so, we've been working with G2G for well over 4 years, and they've helped with some of what I just described. But even more importantly, what they've helped us do is interface with legislators' offices, with other potential collaborators, and very importantly, the focus of today's webinar, the Department of Defense. So I've been, as the slide that was up there showed, I've been selected to present at MHSRS 4 times. I've presented at Tech Connect 3 times, and we were fortunate to receive innovation awards each time. I've exhibited at the vendor day at Fort Detrick. But what's really exciting right now, my team is actually working on under a funded contract with the Air Force 59th Medical Wing. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we got there. And we certainly see a rich future for this continued collaboration. And so I think one important thing to convey is that it's kind of an iterative process. So we've always understood from the beginning, you kind of now have at least a little understanding of what our technology is. We kind of saw needs in these civilian elective surgeries, but we always understood there may be applications that would be useful in trauma care or like emergency medicine, in military medicine as well. Our devices, we know they can be made compact, they can be rugged, we could make them operate on very low power. So it might mean that we can bring, potentially life-saving interventions closer to the point of need in trauma cases. And so here, this is what the important thing we did with G2G. We had this kind of vague idea about that. But we took our ideas to stakeholders in the military health system, and we listened to their feedback, digested it, used that to better understand what their needs were so that we could see how we fit in. And this is one of the things that's really important. We learned to then speak in their language, learn to communicate to them in a way that reflected how we fit with their priorities. And so you kind of keep iterating on this, and you learn more and more. But that helps you earn their support, but also helps them rally support for you. If what you have is really worthwhile, they'll want to help you succeed with it. And so that deeper and more specific understanding, we saw those opportunities, and now we have this better understanding that there's actually just one specific thing that we could potentially be really useful for, which is hemorrhage control. This has been mentioned in this call, in this webinar. If a warfighter is wounded and is at risk of bleeding to death, if we can help put in a device that closes that bleed off from the inside, if it's a part of the body that can't be stopped with a tourniquet, then we could save that warfighter's life if we can stabilize them long enough to get into surgery. And so that's what we're really excited about doing, and that's the nature of our collaboration with the 59th. So how did we get there? Right? We built relationships that helped us open doors. Our first actual arrangement, our first contract was what they call a CRADA, a Cooperative Research and Development Agreement. This was with the Army Institute of Surgical Research, and it's kind of a very basic agreement. It just allows a DoD entity to work with a third party, us, and no money changes hands or anything, but there's plenty of in-kind support that both sides can put together, and so it's a really good way to do like some feasibility work and start to build a relationship. And those relationships were really important. As it turned out, some of the priorities higher up changed, and so the Army Institute of Surgical Research was no longer in a position to continue that collaboration. But because we'd done this work, we'd made these connections and interfaces with interested parties. Just at that time, we were able to start teaming up with the Air Force instead, with several physicians in the 59th Medical Wing and researchers that had still this desire to work on hemorrhage control in the way that we were proposing. So and as you know, right, that has now been really valuable at this moment. It's resulted in funded contract work, and we're being paid to develop our technology to better meet the needs of the Air Force, potentially a huge customer in the future. So it is our hope and our expectation that if we're successful with this, we'll be able to use the results to move, get more funding, move further towards commercialization. But yeah, so it all came down to connecting to the right people, knowing what they needed, matching it up to our capabilities. And so that, the most useful tool for that was the Military Health System Research Symposium. So it is a research symposium. It's a scientific conference. And so it's been really a privilege to be able to present our scientific work there. This year's deadline has passed, so if you have not had the chance yet, try next year, please. It's absolutely worth sharing your data and taking advantage of the FaceTime on the podium. But regardless, whether you get the chance to present or not, the networking opportunities at this conference, they're just tremendous. It's hard to really convey the scale of MHSRS, and maybe it'll be a little bit different this year, what with the pandemic. But the whole purpose of this is to connect all of the different stakeholders in the military health system. And one thing I learned very quickly the first year I went was there is a really deep understanding on the part of our colleagues that are in the DoD that to provide the best care to our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians, to make sure that they maintain their ability to fight effectively for us. It is necessary for the government to work with people like us. The most brilliant and promising innovation, it comes from the private sector, and especially small businesses. So, partnering with entrepreneurs is an essential part of how the DoD works toward their goals. And so, at MHSRS, there are certainly scientists and clinicians, the people you'd expect at a conference like that, but there are a lot of participants from industry, and especially a lot from startups like us. So, there are some conferences where you as a life science private sector company might feel that it's a scientific conference and you're kind of sidelined a bit, and that's not how it is at MHSRS. It's an essential part of what they're trying to do. And if you think about the folks that are there from the DoD, this is another thing that really struck me. They really want to help. These are people who have made careers out of public service, and so they'll be really busy, especially probably the ones you want to talk to. But if you can get just a little bit of time with them, get a hold of someone in the right role, just like a 30-second conversation can set a ball in motion. And if a person you're speaking with isn't the right one, more often than not, they will help you find the right person to talk to. And then, maybe you reconnect after the dust settles, after the conference. But this is what's been so valuable for us. And so, so how do you do it? How do you actually do that? Well, it sure helps to be a G2G client. They are experienced. They have relationships with leadership, people that can really help. But in any case, they publish the conference program in advance, all the breakout sessions, and there are multiple concurrent tracks. Like I said, the scale of this thing is unbelievable. You will have to do some prioritizing. You'll have to deal with some FOMO probably. But if you look at who the speakers are, look who the moderators, the panelists are, read up on their backgrounds, figure out who's in a position to help you in the ways that I've described here, or who would benefit from understanding what you have to offer and the opportunity to work with you. So, see what session they're in. Maybe after the session, camp out a bit, find them, introduce yourself. Chances are they won't have a lot of time right then. So, I kind of have like a 10-second, a 30-second, and maybe a 90-second elevator like speech ready. But the other good thing that G2G has helped us do each year is we call it a white paper. We prepare this. It's not the same kind of way you might think of a scientific white paper, but it's like a single sheet of paper, maybe front and back, maybe just the front, with some clear visuals, a description of the problem, the solution, the opportunity, what have you. Something that you can just hand to them and they can look at later. And if you have a presentation, it's great. You can just put that in the corner there, and that becomes something easy for them to look at and maybe come connect with you later. So that's a big part of MHSRS, about making those connections. But then the other piece that's really valuable is sponging up as much as you can about the military health system's needs. So, you can imagine it's the federal government. So the way they set priorities is it's very structured. The Congress sets the priorities for the high-level commands that cascades down into goals and programs to achieve those goals. So, as an example, the understanding what their goals are, what their needs are, for us, we have noticed that we are well into this shift in the way that they think about combat casualty care. So this is a great example, I think. So in the past, and this is what I've learned sponging up from them. Like in the past, the USA, we've always been able to rely on air superiority in a conflict. So we could count on our ability to get, aircraft in and evacuate casualties promptly. But the models for the next conflict are not like that. So they include near peer adversaries that could prevent this type of evacuation. And that necessitates a new focus on prolonged field care. So medical operations that go beyond basic resuscitation, temporary stabilization. More generally, there's a focus on multi-domain operations, gain an advantage over a near peer adversary, but that complicates prolonged field care. So I'm kind of being intentional in my words here, and you might feel like I'm just saying a lot of buzzwords, but they actually do have specific meanings, and using them correctly has really helped us communicate effectively what our product or future products could do and how they fit in to the future warfighters' needs. And so ultimately that communication is what brings about these opportunities to collaborate. So I've kind of just ranted on for a while here, but let me kind of summarize it in a few points here. MHSRS is full of people who want to work with you, and help others work together. So go in with that mindset. Look at the program ahead of time, plan who you want to connect with, and be prepared for what you'll show them or what you can give them. Follow that iterative process, listening to what they have and what their needs and priorities are, refining your communication to match that language and better understand which of their priorities fit with your technology. Because some of them won't, but you probably will find some will. There are a lot of needs in that overlap in life science innovation and the military health system. And finally, some of it will be a long game. Priorities shift, new opportunities arise. You might have to go back to a connection that you made much earlier when that happens. But coming back to that first point, that we go to MHSRS and things like this to make those connections. So I think those are the salient points that I wanted to share here with our audience. There's certainly a lot more to think about. And at Centerline, we benefit a lot from G2G's guidance through it. So maybe what I can do now is pass the baton back over to Liz to share a little bit more guidance, and then we can go into the fireside chat discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much. I thought that was super helpful, and you're very complimentary, which I appreciate. But but yeah, I think hearing your experiences is very illuminating for people. So what we have next is just any final questions people have, final tips we can give. We want to provide that. So we can go right into the Q&A. Is that what we should do, Greg? Okay, so given the fact that you've done this a few times, and I like how you talked about how you've noticed just in combat casualty care it's changed. If you could tell someone who has never been to this conference, one or two things if they're registering now and they're going for the first time, what are like one or two tips that you would give them since they've never been before?
Yeah, I may sound like I'm repeating myself a little bit with this, but it was something that I really had to work to internalize. Just, you might feel at first apprehensive or shy about approaching people, but just really try to internalize. They want you to do that. People are there for the purposes of meeting people like you, like us. So I think that's an important one. The scale of the conference can feel overwhelming at times, but that I think is just something that just be prepared for. Just know that it'll be that way, and hopefully that won't be too tough to navigate.
Yeah. So have you ever found when trying to work with some of the contacts within DoD or VA or any of those folks that at first they're not very friendly or too busy or something, and any advice on how to navigate that and kind of make sure you get their attention and can turn it into a real relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question, Liz. And yeah, I mean, it's very common to feel like they don't have time for you. And that's why I think practicing that like 10-second pitch, like having a very well figured out way to talk about what you're doing in a way that respects the fact that these people have hundreds of people trying to get at their time, I think is important. I think it's more common, right, that they have limited time than that they have no interest. But there certainly is a challenge, and we've faced this. Communication about something is that may be a complex technology or device or technique or service, like that can be hard to do. And so if you can, it really helps to have visuals. I talked about having visuals on your white paper, but we built like a miniature portable version of our system, and we bring that to the conference. And so then you make it interactive. If you can do something like that, it really helps, because they do only have a really limited amount of attention, and I think it's probably not because they just don't want to help. It's just that they have so much to do. generally I've been quite struck with how much they do want to help.
So Liz, we've got some questions from the audience, if I can just kind of jump in real quick.
Yeah.
And I think we'll just kind of do this real quick. So somebody had asked when and where is the conference? So just wanted to say it's September 12th through 15th, and it's in Kissimmee, Florida, just outside of Orlando. It's at the Gaylord Palms Resort and Convention Center, and registration for the conference will open July 11th. Somebody asked, do you have, or can you point us to a source for a model one-page white paper suitable to hand out at MHSRS?
Yeah, we definitely have a model that we use, and what we could do is, as a follow-up to this call, we'll send to everyone sort of a redacted or, you know, a simplified outline for people. I think that's something that we could share with you all. Sure.
Okay, great. So Vikash, maybe this one's for you. It says, our company has been selected or invited to present a poster based on the abstract submitted in 2021. What ideally should a poster presentation look like?
Oh, that's a great question. And actually it connects to kind of an important question about even just making a submission. You know, they're actually very explicit about not having a specific format expected for either a poster or for even just the abstract that you submit. I think that's intentional, right? That there's a lot of freedom there to present the problem, the solution, the way that you evaluated your solution, your methods, and, you know, your conclusion and discussion, how you see fit. But I would say, do remember it's a scientific conference, and so you know, it might be tempting to kind of set it up almost like a pitch for your company or device, and I would avoid doing that. You do want to respect the format of a scientific conference, but that doesn't mean there isn't room in there for you to be promoting the work you're doing. If you focus on, you know, what it allows people to achieve, what physicians might have done with it in whatever research you're doing, you know, those are things that are very powerful and can, you know, on paper there speak for themselves.
And, you know, somebody posted before you even said that, Vikash, I think this ties nicely into what you just said, is to ask the MHSRS attendees or the DoD people about their research, that they'll be really passionate about their own research projects, and you'll be able to kind of measure the fit with your goals. So I think that was some good advice as far as kind of breaking through that sometimes intimidation, even though we've all been to these events, just to kind of, we're all there for a common purpose. So whoever said that, I didn't appreciate that. Yeah. So Liz or Vikash, somebody had asked, what type of people could we expect to meet at MHSRS? Like who's there?
That's a good question. Almost everyone. So you've got CEOs, you've got researchers, you've got companies, you've got academia, you've got DoD leadership, DoD program managers, VA leadership, VA researchers, a lot of clinicians, you know, doctors, nurses, sort of the whole gamut of professionals. And then there's consultants like us. We've seen more FDA, BARDA folks come over the years, in more recent years. So it's a ton, it's thousands of people from different sectors. And so that's why it's particularly great networking.
Great. So I'm just conscious of the time. We've got about 5 minutes left. Could Braden, could you put up the next slide just as kind of a closing final tips? So Liz, this is yours to kind of bring us home.
Great. Yeah. So final takeaways, you want to make sure that you're tracking funding opportunities and MHSRS conference. And so we'll make sure everyone's got that link for MHSRS. And we'll also make sure you've got the link to our Gbg Report tracking system, so that can be helpful to you. Every third Friday of the month at 10 a.m. Eastern time, we do like a highlights reel of the best bioscience funding opportunities. So that's a really great resource for you. And then we charge we do first half hour open to all, second half hour is a deeper dive with more consultation and more intel about different funding opportunities. In addition to getting a copy of the report for a fee. So if that's of interest, it's a very small fee, but if that's of interest, let us know. Or if you just want to do the free part where you just dial in and kind of hear what we talk about, you're welcome to do that too. So whatever is helpful to you, but you do want to get a system going where you're regularly tracking opportunities and you're on top of it before it, suddenly is due the next day. Like you want to be ahead of it. Communication is really important. So this white paper, both Prakash and I talked about, really important that you communicate succinctly and clearly. Just because you're talking to a bunch of PhDs does not mean that they know your particular area, right? So you've got to make sure that someone in a hurry, a gatekeeper, they can understand it fairly quickly. You want to make sure that you understand when you're going after a target, once you have figured out who the target is, that you're really aligning in your matchmaking. 80% there, great. You can do some tweaking and really fit. But if it is not a fit, it is not a fit. And you're wasting time on, something that's not going to produce funding for your company. You want to make sure that you're developing relationships with the program managers before making any submission. You can do that at MHSRS. You can do that other ways. We do that obviously throughout the year. We just think MHSRS is a great opportunity for a very efficient way of doing that, but really, really encourage, get to know program managers before making a submission. Make sure you follow the deadlines. If you miss the deadline, you have missed your shot. So make sure you are doing that and also follow the directions. I've talked with program managers who have said a bunch of applications have ended up in the trash like immediately because they didn't follow the directions. So they are really on top of that. Getting the right registrations done. And I know there's been some changes in how they do that with grants.gov, et cetera, but just make sure you've got all kinds of registrations done before you make a submission. Make sure that you're, especially for DoD pre-apps, they always do the pre-app before the full app. That pre-application is getting evaluated by the program managers, those very people you're developing relationships with. And so you want to make sure you're really using the language that they are using, that you've really teed that up. If they then give you the go to the next level, then you do a much longer submission, but you really are in a much better position to get that funding. They're not going to push you through unless they really want you to be funded, because it costs them money to then use outside independent reviewers. So really make sure you've got strong quad charts, simple, clear language in that pre-application. You can also look up the grant reviewers. It's actually available on the Cdmrp website. So you can see sort of who's going to be possibly reviewing your submission. You want to make sure you're aware and cognizant of who's really making the decisions. There's the agency Cdmrp side, but then there's also the congressional side. Congress is the one that puts in lines. And so only a few years ago, they put in the rare cancer line. There was no rare cancer line before. We actually were behind that, but I mean, there's been other efforts. There's a new trauma line before that. So it's really Congress that is setting the type of funding and the final amount of funding. So talk to your members of Congress. If you're going after Cdmrp, they need to know about it. Explore consortiums. We talked about MTech, Army, MCDC, some of these others, great opportunities there. A nice crossover with DoD existing programs. You want to collaborate. Prakash talked about his CRADA, how critical that was. MTAs, we've done lots of both of those with our clients over the years. It's turned into wonderful opportunities. And once you have those types of arrangements, you can team up and go after intramural funding that normally you wouldn't be able to do alone. So it is particularly helpful in accessing new sources of funding in addition to getting data by partnering. Be persistent, build relationships, and align with the opportunities. And I would say my final recommendation is don't give up. It takes time. It takes patience. It takes some of that tailoring to get through, but it can be so fruitful and so helpful in advancing the growth of your company. And those are the final tips. Right on time, 1 o'clock. Thank you all for dialing in. We will send a recording, a link to the recording. We will send you a sample sort of outline for white paper. We'll send you the link to MHSRS and our contact information. So if you have any questions, please let us know. And thank you all for joining today. Bye.